Okay, everybody, welcome. It's Chris again. I've got Dr. McDougall, and we're going to do a Q&A follow-up to our last interview that we did. And some of you know Dr. McDougall well and are fans, and some of you are new to his work, which is not new work. He's been around for 4 decades. But and you guys put out some really good questions, so I put a Q&A on my Facebook page. You guys submitted some great questions. Now, some of them are a little too specific, I think, to ask Dr. McDougall, related to, my mom has cancer, blah, 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 kind of stuff. But there were some really good general questions that I think would be great for this interview. So again, Dr. McDougall, thanks for taking the time to do this.
Well, good to talk to you. I hear we got a great response, and boy, there have been so many topics out there that need to be talked about, like the World Health Organization telling us yesterday that that would be the 26th of October 2015, that meat causes cancer. You talk about me doing this for almost 40 years. This is a conclusion that we came to 40 years ago. Particularly processed meat, they say, but you can't let the regular red meat or even chicken or probably even fish off of the table as far as things that people need to avoid cancer. And then we have the American Cancer Society telling women to have less frequent mammograms. That's kind of interesting. And then JAMA Oncology published an article that said there's no survival benefit for treating women with a early form of breast cancer, but actually no form of breast cancer is there a survival benefit in terms of surgery or radiation. Some in terms of chemo and anti-estrogen therapy, which work the same. But it's kind of interesting. You brought up the 40 years. I look back on the fact that we knew all these things 40 years ago, and all the people who suffered with cancer, excessive treatment for breast cancer, even death and mutilation is the typical result of breast cancer treatment. All these things have been going on for 40 years, and I'm writing a little article about it in this newsletter that's coming up. And the conclusion is that money rules over the harm that is caused to women and men and families and so on in terms of testing, prevention, treatment of cancer. Well, go ahead, Chris. I'd like to hear your questions. Just wanted to reminisce a little bit about the 40 years.
Well, you can just talk all you want.
It's sad.
No, it is. It is. We talked about this in our last interview. I know it has to be frustrating as a practicing physician to see so many people, suffer and die needlessly.
It used to be frustrating. I have to say that, with global warming and all the other things that are going on in the world, I can't take it personally anymore, so frustration has kind of gotten out of the picture.
Just learn to let it go.
I really feel sad for what's going on. As you mentioned, I'm almost 70, but I have grandchildren and children that have to live in the world that has been created by my generation and the generations before. So, sad is probably the word that I live with now, rather than frustration.
Yeah. Now, a topic that you discuss a lot is sugar and carbohydrates and fats, oils. And this question came up many times. And so I'd like to ask you to explain, you made a statement in our last interview that oils could either be at best a medicine and at worst a poison.
Yes.
Could you expound on both of those ideas?
Well, it's not a food. Oil is not a food. You have to step back and realize that oil was once a component of food. It's just like if you take apricots, and apricots are known to have cyanide in them, particularly in the apricot pits. If you take the cyanide out of the apricot and you give it to somebody, at best it's a medicine, at worst it's a poison. So when you take different components of food out and you isolate them, concentrate them, they're no longer food. They're substances, chemicals of similar nature. And so oil is that. It's not a food. It has none of the protective environment around it, like the vitamins and minerals and proteins and fibers and other phytochemicals that made the oil an important component of the food. And so when the food is digested, all the vitamins, minerals, and other components of the food go in with the oil and cause the oil to act properly within the body, within the cells. Without that surrounding environment, you have an isolated substance which is easily is easy to understand that that isolated substance and the concentrated nature of the substance makes it easy to be stored in the body as body fat, and also ends up on the skin. It wouldn't be too hard to imagine that oil must go someplace, and particularly a problem for young people, teenagers, where they have this terribly oily skin, which results in bacterial growth and acne. So the other thing we've known since the 1920s, studies have been done where they've set up experiments with animals, and they feed them various substances, protein, carbohydrate, various food substances, isolated oils, and so on. And we've known since the 1920s and well established by the 1940s that fat, all kinds of fat, animal fat, and vegetable fat in particular, promotes the growth of cancer. The number of cancers found in the animal, the speed of growth of the cancers, the size of the cancer, they're all affected when you add oil to these type of animal experiments. So it's toxic in a cancer sense. It also has been related to causing gallbladder disease, eating oil. Some of the oils that were used back in the 70s to try and prevent heart disease, they were the polyunsaturated fats, corn oil type substances that were used, mainly omega-6s. They've been found subsequently to actually accelerate heart disease in people rather than retard it. So, there's some known adverse effects of oil, and it should be avoided.
So when did you stop consuming oil?
I stopped consuming it, probably as an active effort. Doesn't mean that occasionally I might be poisoned at a restaurant, which I avoid. I really avoid with great effort.
I understand.
I pick my Mexican restaurants very carefully when I go out and have bean burritos. But I stopped, I changed my diet pretty severely back in 1977. So that was a long time ago. That was almost 40 years ago.
And at that time, did you see some of this oil research?
Oh, yeah. See,
Yeah.
I started studying the research back in 1976. And by 1977, I pretty much knew the things that I know today. And certainly by 1979, pretty much everything I'm telling you today, I knew. I had the research papers. If you came over to my home, I'd take you down under the house where we have a space under the house, and I keep file cabinets. I've got 5 large file cabinets of research that I collected during those years. And the situation was I was a medical resident at the Queens Medical Center in Honolulu. And on the same grounds as the Queens Medical Center Hospital, where I worked in Honolulu, on the same grounds was the Hawaii Medical Library. And so I was on call a lot, and some of the times I didn't have to work. And I got time away from my duties at the hospital, and I would go over to the library. And at that time, we didn't have computers. We had something called the Medicus Index, which were large books. I mean, really thick books, and there were many of them. I can't even recall, but a long row of books. And you'd go look up something like you'd look up cancer and then subset food or fat. And it would list the articles that had been published. This is all hand-done work, published articles. So I go look them up, and then I go through the stacks of the library, even into the basement of the library. And I find these research papers, and to copy them, because copies cost 10 cents a piece. I couldn't afford to copy them. So what I would do is I'd take a hand truck, and I would load them in cardboard boxes, and I would carry them over to the hospital where I had free access to a copy machine. I've been back to that library building. It's no longer a library. You can still see chunks out of the steps that I made with that hand truck as I was hauling cartloads of books over to the hospital to be copied. And so I have those original copies. In fact, if people take the course, the continuing medical education course that I have up for physicians, if they take that course, or even the Total Health Solution certification class, where people become certified in the Starch Solution, not the Total Health Solution, but the Starch Solution. If people take either one of those classes, they have access to my favorite articles, because what I did last year, maybe a year and a half ago, I spent about 6 months taking these paper articles and putting back into computer form, putting into PDF files, and all those PDF files of my favorite articles are up on my website. So people who take access to either one of those classes can, see the efforts that I put in 40 years ago by hand.
That's amazing. And I imagine many of these articles are not on PubMed.
They are not on PubMed, many of them, but many of them are. You can't get them unless you go to a library. I'm an assistant clinical professor at 3 medical schools, and so I have access to the library, and I can have the librarians search these things out. And they're someplace, they're in some national library in some building in New York or Washington, D.C., but they can be found. But I just happen to have access to all of them. I made them available to all sincerely interested people, who, doctors. There are many, many physicians who are changing their ways in terms of understanding the practice of medicine. As they say, it's sad that I see all this happening so late in my career, but I really do see the medical profession changing. The dietetic profession, headlines like are in today's paper about meat causing cancer from the World Health Organization. This may be another one of those, well, they're saying it again, and it may just be forgotten. That's certainly a more likely possibility than people standing up and making changes. But I do see changes being made. Last week I talked at Tripler Army Medical Center in Hawaii. I was there and I talked to the doctors and pharmacists and dietitians. And in the past I haven't done too many talks to physician groups because I don't know. I think that I've always been considered an outlier. A quack, whatever. Certainly not the real kind of drug pushing doctor. Any doctor that recommends women don't get mammograms and men don't get PSA tests, you've got to question their sanity. And I've been saying this for 30, 40 years. So my invitations to speak to my colleagues have been few. And when I have spoke to them, which I have on several occasions, the response has been one of silence, never really questioning, unless I personally angered somebody, never really questioning what I had to say, but just kind of a numb silence. And I think because they were always too embarrassed to ask, is this true? Or why do you think this way? Because you would expect a doctor or a dietitian to know these things. Well, I went to Tripler Medical Center last week, and I've been getting letters from the doctors and dietitians that attended the meeting. They've made kind of like a club out of it, and they're starting to study the Starch Solution book, and they're taking turns bringing in meals for each other. It's an amazing response that happened, and I think it reflects the times. I really do. I think things are changing, and some very positive things are going on. The question is it soon enough, and is it going to be strong enough that it's going to make a difference? So. It's a new world that I've seen happen over the last 40 years, and it's because of people like yourself and doctors and lay people and dietitians and so on have finally come to understand the truth of what's so obvious. It's the food. It's the food. The food is making people well or sick. And it's always been that way. They've taught it in the Bible. They've taught it, in every history book that you can read that's of any substance. It's always been the food. Usually not enough of it, but when you talk about the rich, the kings and the queens and the pharaohs and the priests and priestesses, when you talk about the wealthy class of any society, it's always about the food and how fat and sick they are. So, it's not news.
It is fascinating to see and exciting that there are so many nutritionally minded and even plant-based physicians. I mean, that segment of the medical industry seems to be growing rather quickly. Like there's a new generation of very, very nutritionally minded MDs out there.
Right. The only problem they're having is finding a way to make a living. That's always been the problem. Pushing drugs is a efficient way to make a living because you can see somebody in 7 minutes. And you've had a relationship that you can see happen. The doctor gave you something for your money. He gave you a prescription, and so the patient feels like the visit was worthwhile, and the doctor felt like he or she did their duty, even though the pills are most often more harmful than good. If you go in and see a doctor and the doctor says, what you ought to do is eat potatoes, and you ought to stop taking those pills. I don't have a prescription to tell you to stop taking them. I'm just telling you to stop taking them. And you ought to have oatmeal and stop eating the meat, all the meat. The patient says, well, why did I come in here? I didn't get anything. And the doctor finds it difficult to charge. And there's not an insurance system out there that will really reward the medical businesses, the dietetic businesses, for doing what they ought to do, which is to cause people to have health and not sickness. Anyway, that's the new the new obstacle, or the current obstacle for doctors these days is, how do you make a living doing this? Now, my son, who's a board-certified internist also, he works up in the Portland area for a company called Zoom Care. It's public information, so I can tell you this. And they're just starting to build a new practice based on, believe it or not, they're even advertising, come to us, we'll get you off your drugs.
Wow.
It's just amazing. And,
I love it.
He has, outside of the emergency department, of the departments in Zoom Care, he's telling me, and maybe this is confidential information, and maybe it's not even true, but he suggested to me that his department, which is on lifestyle, not really lifestyle, it's on diet. I mean, diet and lifestyle is really not, you shouldn't talk that way. It's really diet. On his department, which he heads, and is the second fastest growing department in Zoom Care. The patient visits have been more than expected. So he's figured out how to make a living. They charge a certain amount for these kinds of visits. And it's always something I wanted to do. To see my son do it gives me great pride. But during my career, I've always thought about, I should take ads out in the newspaper. Come to see me, I'll get you off your drugs.
It's not too late.
Yeah, it's not too late. But no, it really is for me to do it. It's fine for somebody else to do it, and I'll certainly support them and give them the reasons that they should be this bold. But I'm glad to see it happening, and it happens to be in the McDougall family. It's happening right now, but it's happening all over the country. Other doctors are finding, and dietitians finding new ways to make a living doing something that's really good for the patients. Not always diet. It's giving them efficient care. They're even doing house calls again. Doctors are because it's good for the patient. And so things are changing.
I'd like to ask you a couple questions that were submitted by some of my Facebook fans. So Annette asks, how can you be sure you're getting all the nutrients you need?
How? Well, there are a couple of ways. One, you can look at history and see that there have been many times in history when villages and countries and populations of people have only had this simple diet to live on, to reproduce, have babies, raise their children, grow, fight battles, do athletic competitions. That's all they had. Like in the Andes, all they had was potatoes. And when times got tough, that's all they had was potatoes. And between the 1800s and 1900s, there's a history of people in Poland and Russia. That's all they had was potatoes. And post-World War II in Germany, that's pretty much all they had. And the Mayans and the Aztecs, pretty much all they had was corn, and a few vegetables. So the idea, so you could look at the history of human beings. As long as they had enough rice and a few vegetables, they survived in Asia. You can look at that, or you can do what I did, I just told you about. You go back and look at the scientific research that was done. Like in the 30s and 40s and early 50s, the research was done on people. They would take them, for example, William Rose took his students. And the students always wanted to be involved in experiments because they went down in history, in infamy, because they got their name in the article. And so William Rose published 13 of the most important biochemical journal articles ever published. And he published his studies on the protein needs of his students. He actually enrolled them and had them eat mixtures of like cornstarch, and he would put the various amino acids in to determine which amino acids were necessary. The students would get sick if you left out an essential amino acid. So in that way, he determined how much protein people needed, what the essential amino acids were, the ones that we couldn't make and had to get from the food, and what quantity we had to have based on his urine, his students. He did various tests on them, and they'd get very sick if you left a nutrient out. It would happen like in about 48 hours if you left an amino acid out, for example. And similar experiments were done in terms of vitamins and essential fats and so on. So this kind of basic research, which would maybe be hard to do these days because of ethics, housing people and putting them on a near deadly diet. That kind of research was done by very important people. And by the way, that's the research that I was just telling you about that I got out of the library and made into PDF files and put up on my website. So we know that reason too. People actually did experiments on human beings. And then we have all kinds of experiments on animals that have been done, over the past century.
Are people too concerned? Would you say people are in generally too concerned with their vitamins and minerals and what they're, are they getting enough of this or that or the other?
Yes. But see, if they stop and think about it, they've never seen a case of scurvy or beriberi or pellagra. They've never seen it. There are essentially no deficiency diseases in our realm, in probably any place in the world today. Maybe some isolated starving people, but there are no deficiency diseases. Deficiency diseases came about when we started refining food. When we started taking the shell off the rice, we got beriberi. And we started processing the corn, we got pellagra. And when we went out to sea with food out in the ocean, travelers, their perishable vegetables and fruits contained the C and all that. And when they perished, when they rotted after a week or two, then all they were left with was the foods that didn't perish, like the grains and the legumes, which are, as you mentioned, remember from our last conversation, are deficient in A and C. So they developed scurvy. And everybody knows the story about the limeys, the British sailors who figured out if they took limes, the limes would last and they could avoid scurvy. And so anyway, that was discovered. Potatoes were found to be the anti-scurvy vegetable. So yeah, people are concerned about, say this all happened in the late 1800s, that all these discoveries were made of vitamins in the early 1900s. Well, once they discovered these specific deficiencies and they could cure these terrible diseases like beriberi and pellagra and scurvy by giving these simple vitamin substances, the logic that followed was, well, if we can cure these diseases with these individual nutrients, we ought to be able to cure cancer and heart disease. That was the thinking. But you can't cure diseases of excess by treating deficiency problems. Anyway, it also has the financial spin to it, and that is selling vitamins and supplements is a multi-billion-dollar business. So you have the vitamin industry constantly pushing these supplements still today. I mean, in your magazines and newspapers and televisions and infomercials and so on, they're pushing all these supplements on people. This is big business, yeah. So that's what people are worried about. They're worried about diseases that don't exist. And the diseases they have can't be fixed by treating deficiency problems.
Is supplementation a part of your practice at all?
No, not at all. I mean, I recommend B12 to people because there is an extremely small chance of somebody getting an illness from B12 deficiency. And I just decided almost 40 years ago that I'd get rid of that controversy because nobody could criticize me about protein deficiency or amino acid deficiency or calcium deficiency or vitamin D deficiency or there was absolutely no substantial evidence that the kind of diet I recommend still today would have any deficiencies at all, except for B12. There are a few cases, and there are very few cases of actual disease that have been reported due to not enough B12. And it's a long story, but believe me, you can count them on two hands, actual diseases. But, to avoid causing B12 deficiency in anyone or harming anyone, what I've recommended for, almost 40 years is that you take a B12 supplement. But I don't treat any diseases by giving them IV vitamin C. In fact, I discourage people in a very active manner. I tell them that taking these supplements are going to hurt them. So does the Cochrane collaboration and the U.S. Preventative Services Task Force and all major bodies of medical science that try and help the consumer. They come out and they tell you that these things are useless and or dangerous, like vitamin D in March of 2015. I wrote a newsletter on vitamin D, and I told you that taking vitamin D, either by pill, oral, or injection, increases your risk of falls and fractures. It's dangerous. And there are two major studies, intervention controlled trials that looked at this, and both say the same thing. They increase your risk of falls and fractures. It's harmful. Don't do this.
So when you see studies that link low vitamin D levels to higher incidence of disease, let's say in countries that are very far north of the equator,
right?
What's your opinion on that?
Well, that's an association. It's easy to explain. As you move away from the equator, people become more dependent on animal foods because there's seasons when plant foods just don't grow. Around the equator, you have plant foods all the time. So you move away from the equator and you become more dependent on the livestock and the game. You also become wealthier in general as you look at the world. As people move away from the equator, they become financially more abundant, so they can afford more rich foods. As you move away from the equator, you also have less sunshine. But that's the association. Less sunshine, you have more disease. The disease is easy to explain by the fact that if people eat more animal foods and less vegetables, less starches, as they move away from the equator. It's not for lack of vitamin D. You have so much vitamin D that can be produced by the body that you can go up to places like just south of Alaska or just north of Vancouver. They have the Great Bear Forest, rainforest up there. And they have a huge rainforest that's grown by sunlight of the intensity north of Vancouver. So if you can grow a great rainforest, or another example, and this one comes from my son also, who I told you lives in Portland. He says all the time patients come into him and they say, well, I have to take vitamin D pills because I live in Portland and there's no sun. And he says on occasion he'll tell them, look at the roofs on those houses. They have solar panels. Why would they put solar panels up if there is no sunshine? I mean, Portland has a big solar industry up there. Many companies sell solar panels, and many houses have solar panels on. There's plenty of sunshine. Yeah.
Okay, so you eat grains.
Yeah,
what are your favorites? What are your favorite grains? Like, what grains do you like?
Oats. Like I say, as soon as we get done here, I'm going to have oatmeal. And I like bread a lot. And bread is made of wheat grain. And we eat rice. Those are just familiar grains.
Right.
There are many other kinds of grains. Those are just the ones that, we grew up with and we're familiar with. But one grain is no better than another. Corn is a good grain. We sometimes have tamales in the evening made of corn. So those are good grains too.
So a lot of people have heard that sugar feeds cancer.
That's not true.
Okay, can you explain why?
I don't even know where that comes from. I don't know any place in the research where sugar promotes cancer. The World Health Organization did not come out yesterday and said sugar causes cancer. I hear that all the time. I don't know where the research is. I'll tell you what sugar does, and what we're talking about is table sugar.
But even starches, I mean, it all falls into that category, right? So potatoes and starches.
Not really. It's like saying olive oil's an olive, or orange oil's an orange. how can you say rice is a sugar? It's the same as white sugar. It doesn't fall in the category at all. What sugar is, it's just basically sucrose. It's just it's a combination of glucose and fructose, and it doesn't have anything else. It doesn't have any protein, vitamin, minerals. It's just empty calories. It gives you energy, and you need that energy to survive on. So, but it doesn't provide anything else. So it's empty calories, and sugar also promotes tooth decay. I'm pretty sure of that. Promotes tooth decay, and in people who are sensitive, who have a tendency towards high blood fats, making these blood fats called triglycerides in the liver. If you feed them sugar, it accelerates the production of blood fat, triglycerides. But those are the only things that I know that white sugar does. I hear it causes cancer, but I've never seen the evidence. Now, a potato is a unit designed by nature, God, whoever you want, a unit to be consumed that has not simple sugars, but chains of sugars put together as amylopectin and amylose, called starch. And it has just enough protein to meet our needs and just enough vitamin C and the other vitamins to meet our needs. Of course, you have to be out in the sun to get the D. But a potato is not a sugar. I just can't, in my mind, I can't even imagine the two being thought of as together. So.
I understand. It makes sense. Okay, last question. Two more. One's a quick one.
All right.
So Sarah asked, is it possible, or she was interested in recommendations for restoring digestive health after chemo, radiation, and surgery, right? We know how destructive they are on your digestive system, especially chemo.
Yeah, okay. You got to start where you're at. Okay. If a horse breaks its leg, you don't put him on sausage and bologna. Okay? The horse still eats grasses and grains because that's the horse's diet. If a patient has their arm cut off, you don't change their diet from a starch-based diet to one of eggs and bologna because they would be healthier. I mean, they stay on the same diet. If somebody's been through chemo, radiation, and whatever, had their breast amputated or their colon amputated, they still stay on the human diet, which is a starch-based diet with fruits and vegetables. That kind of diet gives your body the greatest ability to heal and repair. Carbohydrate is very important. You called it sugar, which is fine. Sugar is very important to fuel the liver, so the liver can detoxify the system. It's carbohydrate that runs that detoxifying mechanism in the liver. So Sarah's diet has always been the same, whether she's followed it or not. And since she's been through some cancer treatment, it doesn't change the fact that she's still a starchivore. She's still a starch eater. She's a starchitarian. And so have all her relatives been, and all human beings throughout history.
So she's got to get the diet right.
The diet is very important. My February 2015 newsletter talks about diet and cancer, and it begins by explaining that the American Cancer Society, as of February 13, 2015, recommends that people who have cancer eat a diet in the direction that I am recommending. They don't come out and say eat the McDougall diet. They should, because that's really what the patient needs to know. But it's an official recommendation from the American Cancer Society. So, when you have cancer, it's still you'll live longer and you'll live better if you eat right.
But my doctor told me I could eat milkshakes and cheeseburgers.
Your doctor is completely ignorant of human nutrition because that's the way medical school is, has been, and will continue to be. They don't teach doctors what people eat.
Okay, last question. So this is coming from me and also from a lot of people that that I follow and follow me. Okay, so for people that have read the China study, for example, or the Blue Zones, or both, or Dr. Burkett's research, what they're seeing is some very common threads. They're seeing very healthy people with long lifespans and very low rates of Western disease in multiple cultures across continents, right? So the one thing that seems to be inconsistent is that none of these populations were purely vegan.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
But they're plant-based. Mm-hmm. So the question is, for someone that, let's say there's someone they're not sick, but they want to be healthy. They listen to you and they're like, this guy makes a lot of sense. I don't want to quit eating meat. And this isn't me talking, just a person. I don't want to quit eating meat, but I'm willing to cut way back. Right? So based on all that research, what would be the maximum allowable, meat consumption that you would feel comfortable with as a physician? You can't say 0 because I know you want to.
Okay. I have a question for you.
Yeah.
You don't want to get lung cancer or emphysema. How many cigarettes should you smoke a day?
That would be 0. Yes, I am with you.
As a physician, I can't do that kind of bargaining with people for a couple of reasons. One is I don't know the answer, and it would vary depending on the individual. Some people are more sensitive than others. I mean, my grandfather lived to be 87 years old on meatballs and onions and eggs. So, other people are more sensitive, more unlucky. So as a doctor, I have to give people the best recommendations I have. It's best to always wear your safety belt. Not 95% of the time. It's best to smoke no cigarettes. And it's best to consume none of the meat that the World Health Organization just said causes cancer. Now that's one issue. That's one issue as my responsibility as a physician, as a teacher. But the other issue is that maybe you or some of your listeners can do a little bit, but most of my patients can't. You open the refrigerator door and it's open. They just can't stop. And I know this. I mean, I remember my days of pepperoni pizza. And I didn't just have one pepperoni pizza slice. I mean, I had the whole darn pizza.
Yeah.
And it's the same way with most of your listeners and most of the people. Is once you give permission for anything, like cigarettes, people can't smoke 2 cigarettes a day. Not addicts and drinkers. They can't drink just a little bit of scotch. There's a certain level that they need to have, and it's the same thing with food. Once you open the door and you say it's okay to have a little, it's unfortunately it's permission for the body and mind and whatever else controls us to allow us to have all we want and can consume. And so I have to take the stand, and it's put me in a unique position among my colleagues also. People that you mentioned, other people that I have great respect for, is they will say it's okay to eat 5-10% of your diet as meat. And they've even asked me to recommend their recommendations and their books and so on. And I say, no, I'm not going to do that. Now, somebody has to stick their heels in the sand, as they say. Somebody has to say, no, you don't do that. And for good or bad, for me personally, or the people around me, I took that position 40 years ago. And I said, none. How much is okay? How much is all right? And the answer is, look, this is what I recommend. And even though other people don't, and they say, I can't prove that eating just a mouthful of chicken a week is going to give them disease, and I probably won't. And I don't need to prove it. But I take the position I take for the reasons I told you. Somebody's got to do it. And I've done it.
Somebody's got to toe the line. Hey, Dr. McDougall, that was a fantastic answer. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, it was good to talk to you. We'll do it again sometime if your listeners like my ramblings.
I'm sure they do.
Well, we'll see.
I'm sure they do. Okay, and where can people find you?
The only way really to contact me in my world is to go to drmcdougall.com, which is our website, and I'll spell it for you. It's drmcdougall. So it's no period with the DR and 2 L's. Or just look up my name, John McDougall, on diet. I think probably the first 20 or 30 responses you'll get on Google or our website.
And I'll add this too. Dr. McDougall has a lot of content on YouTube. He has a lot of fascinating lectures and talks and webinars. And so, I mean, you can learn a lot from this man. I certainly have. And Dr. McDougall, thank you so much again for taking the time to do this. Thank you for your passionate 40 years of service and, bucking the system, right? And sticking to your guns and helping people. I think it's wonderful.
I just want to add, it's been no punishment. Nobody's argued with me, hurt me, they've just ignored me. Seriously.
Yeah.
A lot of people think that it's been a tough road to do what I did and still do. But it hasn't been, and it isn't. And it's actually, as I mentioned, it's becoming enjoyable now as I see the things that I believed in for so long and thought were so important that were ignored are being actually done by other doctors and people, yourself. I mean, the world is waking up. It's a real pleasure for me to sit back and smile and say, oh, it's late, maybe too late, but at least it's happening.
It's not too late.
It's not too late.
Okay.
I believe I have to believe that too, because to get up in the morning and to say it's too late, it's just too darn depressing.
Might as well give up. Yeah.
If you had a chance to talk to my wife, she'd say he's the most persistent optimist that she's ever met in her whole life. But there is good reason to be optimistic.
Thank you,
Good to talk to
Dr.
you.
McDougall.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.